welcome back to Hey Eintracht Frankfurt, the Bundesliga podcast, covering everything there is to know in the English language about Eintracht Frankfurt, the best club in the Bundesliga, the best club in Germany, the best club in Europe, the best club in the world for that matter. But we're a little bit biased. I am your host for today's episode, Brian and KC, back with the opponents, our special series looking at each of the 17 Bundesliga opposition for Eintracht for the 25-26 season. We'll see if we add a little bit more, if we get someone interesting for the Pokal. With the quick turnaround in Europe, it's a little harder to get a lot of the historic matches kind of researched, and if there are historic matches to research, it's another thing that we want to look at. So we're looking at in this weekend's opponent in the Bundesliga for Eintracht is Union Berlin as they come to the Waldstadion. And this match in the history of Eintracht and Union Berlin actually occurred at the Waldstadion in the spring of 2021. And to look at this old Eintracht match and give us a little taste of what Union is and was, we have none other than Kit Holden, author as well. Kit, goodness me, you're kind of busy man. Kit, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, just to give you tidbits, I think you originally got your start with talking foosball, and now you've got multiple published works. What are these books that we can get our hands on, and where can we possibly acquire them?
So I've written two books. The first is about Union and their history and the kind of history of the culture around the club, and then the sort of social side of Union from back in under East German communism up to the present day. And yeah, that's called Scheisse, We're Going Up. That came out a few years ago. In fact, actually not too long after the game we're going to talk about. And my second book came out last year. It's just come out in a new version. It's called Played in Germany. And that's a kind of tour through the football cultures of different regions of Germany, which includes a chapter on Frankfurt and therefore Eintracht, with conversations with a couple of high-profile Eintracht fans. So yeah,
and
where you can get them, I'm not sure.
I think,
yes,
as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I cover Union for the Tagesspiegel, which is a daily newspaper here in Berlin.
Oh, very nice. Berlin, not exactly a place that is quiet when it does come to news, considering the adjoining place where East met West and the current capital of Berlin. And I mean, goodness me, I think in the fifth tier has its own league to promote foosball. Berlin's still a hotspot for foosball.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the sort of forgotten football capitals of Europe, because it doesn't have a kind of Real Madrid or an Arsenal and Spurs or that kind of thing. But yeah, it's got its own. Hertha Union might not be European giants, but both they and the many other clubs in the lower leagues make for a cool football culture in Berlin for sure.
Indeed. Well, let's get to what was the 2021 match, but kind of preview this. So Eintracht and Union, interesting enough, in the sad season of 01-02, Eintracht first met Union in the Zweite Liga. They've since played tied for 39th in the most frequently played matches. Some of the leading scorers of this series all time have been Alex Meyer, the foosball god, with 6. Max Kruse, who in this match had his own scoring boots on, with 5 goals for Union in the history. But COVID during the time in Germany, it's a little different than in the United States. Kit, take us back a little bit to what was the kind of scene in Germany as the Bundesliga kind of got restarted whilst the Geisterspiele were still being played. What was the way of, I guess, for you as a journalist and also a fan, how did you kind of consume the Bundesliga during this time when, only journalists and players were in matches and nobody else?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, I think, for the Bundesliga and Union in particular, and I get onto that, but for the Bundesliga, obviously the kind of fan culture is so central, and so it was very strange for all these huge stadiums which would normally be rocking to be completely empty. As a journalist, I would cover Union home games, and I'd be one of maybe, I guess, 40 people, including the players in the whole ground, maybe 50, and that was pretty eerie. I obviously didn't travel to away games because he couldn't travel, so I wasn't at the game we're going to talk about. Um, and yeah, I think it was a strange time, empty stadiums. There were various attempts and different phases as there were over the of COVID, and sort of various times when certain amounts of fans were let in, and I think in 2022 it finally got the doors fully flung open again, but. Yeah, it was a bit of a roller coaster for Union as well, particularly as I say, I think their fan culture is such a kind of fundamental part of their identity that it really was a kind of strange few years for them, and in many ways quite a controversial few years because they had, on the basis of this, wanting to get fans back into the stadium, wanting to get that kind of sacred stadium experience back up and running at Union. They tried at various times during the pandemic to come up with ways of reopening the stadium or filling the stadium when only half capacity was allowed and things like this. And a lot of people reacted badly to that and thought they were kind of trying to push their luck and playing fast and loose with public health. My own view is slightly more nuanced, but that was the sort of debate that was going on at the time. So yeah, it was an interesting period to be covering Union and German football for sure.
Yeah, and this 2021 season, so with all the guys who speak, it was kind of, it gave an ear. You'd get some weird results in matches because all you'd hear is the players themselves. The fan culture that is in Eintracht and Union are two that, whenever a foreigner decides to visit Germany, they're like, these are two that always get highlighted as ones to kind of impact matches. It had, and yet. Union, where the fans are such a big character, this was actually to date the best league finishing that Union had since being a part of the old East Germany, which is it's kind of eerie to think that all these weird results were going on where fans are such a thing and we're not involved, and yet Union in their ground out to Fórza such a fortress. Yet the team just pulled it out. And I looked at this match day's roster. This was not a Union team that was, some weak fish. I mentioned Max Kruse. He was leading the line. You had, Robert Andrich, a very respected player for Germany right now, has a little bit of an impact on this match. This is a pretty doggone tough Union outfit that was on the field for Eisen Union.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think that kind of was their second season in the Bundesliga, and at the start of that year they signed Kruse, and the other kind of big name, or at the time big name that they signed that summer was Loris Karius, and in the end he didn't. He was number two in goal for the whole season and left pretty quickly. But those two signings in particular that summer at the start of that year were big shocks because I mean since then obviously we've gone on to bigger things, but at the time it was astonishing. It was unthinkable that players of that kind of caliber would consider playing for Union, and very much a sign that even with the pandemic, the club was growing very fast and had pretty lofty ambitions. And I think yeah, I mean the even without the fans, I mean, one thing to note is that the Alpha is so small and so close to the woods around it that for quite a lot of Union's home games in the pandemic, you could still hear the fans because they'd come and stand in the woods outside the stadium and sing from outside. And because it's unlike Frankfurt where you have this huge arena, the Alpha is tiny, so you really could hear them. But I mean, that notwithstanding, it was a kind of an advantage that they lost not having the stadium behind them, but at the same time it was right in the midst of probably their greatest ever era and their greatest ever kind of team under probably their greatest ever coach was Fischer. And yeah, it was sort of they were still riding this wave. Expectations were still very low. They played very freely. They played without fear for 3 or 4 years, and yeah, that was the start of 3 years of qualifying for Europe, which again would have been unthinkable just a few months before.
Indeed, and let's get right to that match. Eintracht Frankfurt, for those people who might not have been tracking where Eintracht was at the time, Eintracht had just rattled off an 11-match unbeaten run, highlighted at the end with playing against always big fish. Bayern Munich, a 2-1 victory that Eintracht had. And like Kitten, you've followed the Bundesliga a long time. It does seem that whomever it is Leverkusen recently being, kind of one of the lone exceptions. Like whenever a team faces off against Bayern and gets points off of Bayern, whether it be they get earn one or they earn three, there's always been this constant letdown in the subsequent matches that happens. And here is no less than Eintracht had gone on a three-match winless run, defeats to Bremen, and then draws with Borussia, and draws with Leipzig. That going up against Union, I seem to recall my own self thinking, "Oh God, we're in the midst of another winless run." We had one in the fall. At that point, Union was still, flying under the radar, but in the midst of catching Eintracht. And yet, let's go through some of the teams, the players that were involved in this. I mentioned Robert Andres, some of the players for Eintracht, coming out with Silva, Kostic. We mentioned Kruse, Timothy Chandler. This was an out and out, full flung. Watching back on the highlights and the entire match itself, you mentioned Union was a high flying team. Like, how was it that they what was the key to Union's attack that allowed Max Kruse, who in this match had a very potent impact? How did Union just kind of get these results from this season?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say. It was difficult to say then, and it's difficult to say now. And I think a lot of it has to do with momentum. I think, as I said, the expectations were low, and once you get that kind of run, it can carry you quite a long way. I think the other thing that always people talk about with Union and why they're able to overachieve, and particularly in that period, was that they really have, and this kind of changed in 2023 actually, but they really have this kind of unique situation where nobody really looks at them. I mean, even my paper in Berlin, the readers care much more about Hertha than they care about Union. Union are very much a kind of a neighborhood team rather than a team for the whole city, or have been traditionally. And they tend to keep themselves to themselves. They tend to be very, very careful in their work with the media, in their work with the outside world. And that has its downsides, but it has a massive upside, which is that they then tend to create very, very, very gelled and protected teams of players who can really, really focus entirely on their football. And I think, this was a period where, perhaps even more exacerbated by the pandemic, where they really were kind of, costed off from everything. That was very much the case with this team, and that kind of, I mean, I think if you look at the way Fischer played his football, this game is a bit of an outlier. And I think they had 25 shots on goal to 9 or something like that. That's not the football they were playing most of the time. They were playing, three at the back, defensive hit teams on the counter attack. But Kruse changed that. I mean, he played a huge role in changing that for Union in the couple of years he was there. So yeah, it's as I say, difficult to explain, lots of different factors. And yeah, a good time from a Union perspective, particularly when you compare it to now.
Yeah, this match, not gonna lie, the first minute in, Union has a goal line clearance off the Eintracht line. You'd think that, oh wow, right from the off, Union just like taking it to him, a free set piece specialist. Nearly had the opportunity, went right down the pitch with Andre Silva scoring his first goal of the match. I mean, it's just still just a second minute to have that goal. Then you talk about how Max Kruse has such an impact, long ball up to the guy. The Piampolo had his shot saved, and Max Kruse kind of pounced on the rebound, a little bit from distance rebound, was able to slot that home. But rewatching this match, Union just kept on coming at Eintracht. I had honestly forgotten how much Eintracht relied on just being such a counter-attacking side at that moment in time. They're like, oh, it doesn't matter who we're playing against. We're just going to go at them. And Union kind of wanted to take it right to them. But we did have, in the 35th minute, one of the most interesting own goals I still have he had ever seen. We're not talking like, goalkeeper getting his water bottle and didn't notice that the team was attacking down the end, but Robert Andres looks to pass back to his goalkeeper, and the goalkeeper had no idea. Well, Robert Andres had no idea that it was wide open, and one of the more memorable own goals scored right there. I can imagine you watching that back. You're like, oh God, that's this match.
Yeah, exactly. I'd sort of it had slipped my mind, but it all came flooding back looking at that clip for sure. Yeah, it was a weird one. I think Luther was maybe, I guess he must have been like taking a drink or something because he was in a strange position, sort of like quite near the
Exactly.
goal line, off to the near post. And actually, where Andres hits it, he should look up and see, but Andres hits the ball to where Luther would normally be standing in that place, which is maybe a few yards in front of his goal line and pretty central. And so yeah, I remember after the game, Luther said something along the lines of it's not Andres' fault, and he hit the ball pretty well. So yeah, I think a bit of a freak goal and yeah, a funny one in the context of that game because I think, as you say, Union were for a long time in that game all over Eintracht, and I think Eintracht had something like 5 shots on target and scored 5 goals, including the own goal. So yeah, a pretty kind of strange game, and I think that own goal definitely kind of knocked the wind out of Union a little bit and changed the run of the game.
Yeah, within that being the 35th minute, within the next 10 minutes, basically to end the half, we had an extra 3 goals. Fidek Kostic was able to get a goal after, getting the assist to Silva. Silva banged in a second at the 41st, Kostic in the 39th. Max Kruse was able to get one right in stoppage time of the second, right at the cusp stoppage time of the first half. We're going in and not going to lie, 6 goals in any neutral watching a match like that would be like 6 goals, having some more of that. And yet, the rest, as the match went on, and we didn't have another goal until the 92nd minute, it was still Union just trying to walloping. Honestly, watching that match back, it made me think this is stuff from Baumgart's, like no holds barred, just go at them, just come at you like a flood, a tidal wave. And yet, Eintracht did stay true, but Union just kept on going and going and going. And it's no wonder, Kit, that like Union ended up finishing 7th of the season. Chandler, the German American, was able to get a substitution goal in the 92nd to finish off the match at 5-2. But this kind of jump started Eintracht season just a little bit, trying to, after kind of going a little dead after the Bayern Munich result, Eintracht was able to basically stay in 4th place until the final 2 matches where, Eintracht only picked up a win on the final match day, but a Wolfsburg coach led by Oliver Glasner ended up in 4th place, leaving frogging over the Eintracht. Eintracht still pulled off the most amount of points until this most recent Bundesliga season, but Union, even from this really kind of walloping that Eintracht gave to Union, but we noted, so many attacking options by Union were made. It's no surprise that they ended up finishing in 7th place, and this is a Bundesliga that had the following in their top 6 of Bayern, Leipzig, Dortmund, Wolfsburg, Frankfurt, Leverkusen, and then Union Berlin. They beat out Borussia Mönchengladbach, by a point as the season was able to end, and you got qualified for the first ever edition of the Europa Conference League. Other teams that were not kept out of Europe were Stuttgart, Freiburg, Hoffenheim, Mainz, Augsburg, city rivals Hertha, Bielefeld, who somehow, some way stayed up that season. This is a remarkable achievement by Union, and yeah, you go from your second season of the Bundesliga to qualifying for a UEFA competition and be a club from the former East Germany, the first club since reunification, I believe, for a club to represent Germany in the European competition. And that kind of kicked on Union getting further progression, Europa League and Champions League thereafter.
Yeah. They got in by the skin of their teeth. It's worth remembering because they went on a pretty good run after that Frankfurt game, but they needed a 90th minute Max Kruse header against Leipzig on the final day to get into the Conference League and finish seventh that year. But that definitely, I think that definitely was, it was a huge shock, and it was definitely a moment that kind of that showed everyone what was possible. I mean, the Conference League campaign was pretty modest in the end, but the following year they qualified for the Europa League on the final day, and the year after that the Champions League on the final day. And I think that first spring, if you like, that first qualification for the Conference League was definitely a kind of watershed moment that said, okay, this team and this club is able to challenge for those kind of fourth, fifth, sixth. I mean, by 2023, I mean, in April, they were still in the title race. I mean, it was an extraordinary few years where they really were punching hugely above their weight for a long time.
Yeah, and yeah, Urs Fischer was able to kind of you just guys just kind of Rome wasn't built in a day, as I say, and that was just kind of like those initial stepping stones that Union has been took as a club with subsequent European qualification. Now, I do believe that debut European season they didn't get to play at the Fostrai, or they did. I know in Champions League that they had to play at the Olympiastadion for uh, I think the president's request to try and get the big match day revenue. But how did this kind of set off Union in terms of building themselves into a far more sustainable club in future, which, not gonna lie, city rivals Hertha in the western side of the city really have to be envious whilst being still stuck in the mire of the second division.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I mean, I think in some ways Union are almost a bit comparable to something like Eintracht or maybe VfB Stuttgart, where that there is the kind of, because they're in such a big city, there is always this sort of potential, in bad times, dormant fan base that can be mobilized pretty quickly if things start going well. And I think that really, you saw that happen, and what that kind of means financially in those few years, because when Union got promoted in 2019, they had, I think, 19,000 members. Within about 6 weeks of promotion, they had 30,000 members. That had gone up to about 40, 50,000 by the time they were in the Conference League. It's now at 70,000. So this is, we're talking about a huge exponential growth in people wanting to be part of this club, be voting members, be in the running to get tickets. And nowadays, I mean, ever since they've been in the Bundesliga, and particularly nowadays, it's everything is done by a draw, and for tickets for home games, it's hugely competitive. They've now overtaken Hertha in membership figures, which, again, 5 years ago would have been unthinkable. Hertha have always been by far and away the biggest club in Berlin, and I think it was obviously getting to the Bundesliga is big, but European success was the really big thing. Hertha going down is obviously quite big, because then you are the only Berlin club in the Bundesliga. But European success was really the thing that made, I think, a lot of people start coming to Union who perhaps wouldn't have done otherwise, and start paying attention to Union. And that financially has quite a fundamental thing if you're a medium-sized club like that, because it's not just the ticket sales, which are limited in the Alta Försterei, but it's all the merch, it's all the advertising deals you can get, the different sponsors, and very, very quickly Union started playing in completely different leagues, if you like, economically than they previously would have been able to. And I think that's shown now. I mean, you look at this summer, they effectively outpriced Werder Bremen, and who wanted to keep hold of Oliver Burke, and from what people understand, it was Union's financial power that eventually sort of lured him away, which again is crazy. Werder Bremen, this grand old club, and the once tiny little Union. So yeah, it's been a huge transformation, and getting into Europe, I think, has been a fundamental part of that growth.
There was the little hiccup of playing in the Champions League and some of the transfers, Gatens and Bonucci, both coming to Union. Would you say that Union, it just didn't work out? The joyride you could almost play was kind of like maybe the zenith was reaching, the top four and the Champions League and everything that comes from that. Was that kind of why things in the subsequent season kind of unraveled, and Union just took a minute for Union to kind of restabilize again?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always, we've seen it before with Eintracht, we've seen it with Mainz and Augsburg and Freiburg, and countless clubs in the Bundesliga who particularly the Champions League and often other cases, even getting into the Europa League or the Conference League, proves to kind of change the dynamic of everything, and clubs then have a couple of bad years or one bad year, and I think on that happened. And I think Bonucci and that kind of thing. I think this narrative that they bought wrong in that summer, I don't necessarily agree with, because I think those were relatively low risk transfers, most of them, and they were bought for the Champions League, and they didn't work out fine. But in many ways they did. Leonardo Bonucci played brilliantly against Real Madrid in Madrid, and Union almost got a point there. And Kevin Volland scored against Madrid in Berlin, and Union had one of the most famous games, losing 3-2 to Real Madrid and almost always getting a point again. So, in some ways, those players did what they were bought to do. But I think once it starts, the difference in that season was that, you had that run of 13, 14 games where they didn't win. And once that, and they weren't playing badly, to be fair, but once that kind of rhythm kicks in and you're playing week in, week out, every 3 days, and you're not only playing Slavia Prague, and no disrespect to Slavia Prague, but you're not only playing Slavia Prague and Union Saint-Gilloise, you're playing Real Madrid, you're playing Napoli in those midweek games. It's very, very hard to reset that rhythm and take a breath and then and get back into it. And that's what they found. And by autumn, things had got so bad that Fischer and the club decided together that they would move on. I think in hindsight that was the wrong decision, because the coaches that came after him also weren't very good, and they very nearly went down that year, and they're sort of still recovering from that now in some ways. But yeah, it was a strange season, but I think everybody at Union knew that kind of run was going to end at some point, and that getting into the Champions League was probably the thing that was going to end it. And everyone enjoyed the ride.
Well, Kit, one thing that I kind of wanted to get to, and I noticed that the Frauen Union has kind of been able to also how has the women's team been able to benefit from the fact that they were in the third, fourth tier, and now suddenly they earned promotion last season. They have the highest average attendance in all of Germany. Is this does it correlate between the success of the men that they had and suddenly, as you mentioned, this so many memberships being bought, and the tickets having to go on a little bit of a kind of lottery system? Is that almost how hey, you can go to the men, you can also go to the ladies, and subsequent people are like, okay, well, can't go this weekend, I'll go see the women. That thousands of fans going to see the women really does a difference at the lower end of the lower leagues of the the women's kind of pyramid. Would you say that correlated to the suddenly stratospheric rise of the women's team?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reason the women's team have risen is because they professionalized 3 years ago now, I guess, or 2.5 years ago, and they have put in a huge amount of money, both into players and staff, but also into infrastructure around the women's team. And last year started playing games in the Alte Försterei, which the amount of money they put in is massive and significant. They're spending on the level of a medium to large size women's Bundesliga team now, and that if you ask anyone at the club, they will say that is the result of the success of the men, and that was always the long-term strategy: get success at the men's level, get the income that generates, use that to invest in infrastructure. And they're currently renovating their whole sort of infrastructure at the club. They've got a new academy set up. They've got a whole new training ground is being built, which will be shared by the women and the men. The stadium's about to be expanded. So, this is very much a long-term plan, which the women are very much a part of. And I think that the attendance figures of the women are, there's two things. There's one is what you said, is that there's a lot of people who want to come and see Union, and the women is a chance to get into that stadium and get the kind of Union experience without having to go through the pains of getting tickets as you do with the men. But also there's just a thing of Union fans just always come to Union games, and the base that they have, the kind of the base level of passion and readiness to turn up is remarkably high. And you saw that, even when the women were playing in the Regionalliga, as soon as they started playing in the Alte Försterei, you had 12,000 fans in there, and it's extraordinary. But it's just how it is.
Yeah, it's the sheer rise of them is quite extraordinary, and I look forward to kind of how the season progresses within the Frauen Bundesliga for Union Frauen. But looking towards this weekend's match, what can we expect from Union? Let's see, we got first match day victory over Stuttgart, but subsequently playing against Hoffenheim at home with the Alta Försterei didn't yield results at the weekend, especially after going away to Dortmund and Dortmund playing like they actually wanted to play. What are your thoughts to this weekend's match before we close on this episode?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, they're quite difficult to judge at the moment on Union because, as you say, I mean, there's the Stuttgart win, the Dortmund they always lose, and they were poor in Dortmund, but they always lose there. It was no surprise. And then against Hoffenheim, they were probably the better team over 90 minutes in that game, but a bit like that game against Frankfurt that we were talking about, they just had a few moments where they melted down, and Hoffenheim were very clinical, and everything that could go wrong did go wrong. So I'll be interested to see how they do. I think that they do look a bit stronger. It does look a little bit like Baumgart is starting to kind of impose his ideas a little bit more than he was able to last season. But at the same time, this is not the team of a few years ago. This is still a team which has some very fundamental problems. And I think particularly in defence, they can look very, very ropey. Probably we'll see Diogo Leite come back in, having been sat on ice for ages while he was pushing for a move away, but Tom Reuter will be suspended after his red card, so I think Diogo Leite will be back in the team, which hopefully will stabilize things a little bit. But defensively, they do look a little bit ropey at the moment, and going forward, they're still trying to internalize Baumgart's ideas and get that rhythm. So I would definitely say Eintracht are strong favourites given the start that Eintracht have had and given the quality Eintracht have, but. Yeah, Union are a little bit of a kind of a mystery bag at the moment. You never really know what you're going to get.
Well, you know what? That's a wonderful way to end this episode of The Opponents, Eintracht versus Union. Kit, it's been a pleasure having you on, and I hope that if you have a chance, folks, have a look-see at either of his two published works. And Kit, it's been wonderful having you on the podcast. Where can we follow you on the social media landscape of the world?
I'm on Substack under the heading Played in Germany. So yeah, if you want to read my stuff for free, then in English, then you can find me there.
All right, appreciate Kit Holden joining us, and tune in next time, folks, for the regular podcast feed going through all the news and information covering Eintracht, and you will hear from me again as we preview yet another historic Eintracht Frankfurt match and the opponent that comes with it. So until next time, folks, cheers! Eintracht Frankfurt, sha-la-la-la-la-la-la. Hey, Eintracht Frankfurt, sha-la-la-la-la-la.